I walked into that courtroom knowing I'd either save my grandsons or lose them forever. My daughter rolled her eyes like I was crazy. Then the judge saw my face and everything changed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 6 months to the day my daughter stopped answering my calls. Their new husband, Garrett, had a plan: steal her inheritance, isolate her from family, make me the villain. And he almost got away with it. This is how one grandmother fought back and won. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because Garrett never saw this coming.
They say silence has a sound. I never believed that until the morning I sat alone in that Buncombe County courtroom, listening to it roar in my ears. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I folded them in my lap, then unfolded them, pressed them flat against the wooden table. Nothing helped. The trembling came from somewhere deeper than my bones, somewhere in that place where secrets live for 43 years, waiting for the day they either save you or destroy everything you've ever loved. Today was that day. The courtroom smelled like old paper and floor polish. I'd arrived early, too early, because I couldn't stand sitting at home anymore, staring at the empty chair where Bennett used to read his picture books, the chair where Holden practiced tying his shoes, his little tongue poking out in concentration. My grandsons, 8 years old, 6 months since I'd held them, 6 months since my daughter stopped answering my calls. The heavy oak doors swung open behind me. I didn't need to turn around. I knew that particular silence, the kind that comes when someone walks into a room pretending you don't exist. "Mum's already here," Sienna's voice said. Cold, distant, like I was a stranger she'd been warned about. Of course she is. That was Garrett, my daughter's husband, the man who'd taken everything from me without laying a single hand on my body. His voice carried that smooth confidence of someone who'd already won. Desperate people always arrive early. I turned then. I couldn't help it. Sienna wouldn't meet my eyes. She wore a navy dress I'd never seen before. Expensive, probably bought with what was left of her inheritance. Her father's money. The money he'd worked his whole life to leave her. She sat 3 rows back, spine rigid, hands clutching a purse that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. And Garrett. He sat beside her, one arm draped across the back of her seat like he owned her. When his eyes found mine, he smiled. Not a big smile, just a small curve at the corner of his mouth that said, "I've already won, old woman. You just don't know it yet." "All rise." The bailiff's voice cut through the whispers that had started spreading through the gallery. I heard the words floating around me like poisonous smoke. That's her, the grandmother. Heard she's been harassing them, showing up uninvited, calling 20 times a day. They say she's not quite right in the head. My attorney, Mr. Brennan, touched my elbow gently. A kind man. Too kind for this fight, maybe. He looked overwhelmed already, and we hadn't even started. Sienna's attorney, a woman named Ms. Hartwell with a sharp suit and sharper eyes, stood with the confidence of someone holding a royal flush. She'd spent 20 minutes before the judge arrived painting me as something between a nuisance and a danger. A meddling mother-in-law. A woman living in delusions about her own past. Someone whose unstable behavior and fabricated stories made her a risk to innocent children. My grandchildren. If I lost today, I'd lose them forever. Bennett and Holden would grow up believing their grandmother abandoned them. Or worse, that I was exactly what Garrett had made me out to be. A crazy old woman who'd invented stories to destroy their mother's happiness. The Honorable Judge Raymond Blackwood presiding. He walked in like judges do. Black robes, stern face, the weight of authority in every step. 58 years old, according to the information Mr. Brennan had gathered. Known for his no-nonsense approach to family law. Fair, but firm. He'd been on the bench for 15 years. He settled into his chair, opened the case file in front of him. His finger traced down the first page, past the case number, past the legal terminology, until it landed on one line. Plaintiff, Marlene Catherine Whitfield. He paused, just for a heartbeat. His jaw tightened slightly, like a man who'd just read something that didn't quite make sense. I held my breath. I'd been holding it, in one way or another, for 43 years. His eyes lifted from the page and swept across the courtroom. They moved past Sienna, past Garrett's smug face, past the whispering gallery. For just a moment, his gaze landed somewhere near my nameplate on the plaintiff's table, but he didn't see me. Not yet, not really. He adjusted his reading glasses, cleared his throat, and looked out at all of us with the practiced neutrality of a man who'd seen 1,000 cases just like this one. "Let's begin," he said. But I noticed something. Something in the way his hand gripped the edge of the file just a little too tightly, in the way his eyes hadn't quite finished their journey across the courtroom, like he was looking for something he couldn't quite name. The recognition hadn't happened yet, but it was coming. And when it did, everything would change. If you've ever watched someone twist the truth to destroy a good person's reputation, you know exactly how this feels. Garrett sits in that courtroom, confident he's already won. He's isolated a grandmother from her own grandchildren using lies, manipulation, and the legal system as his weapon. Don't let manipulators like Garrett win. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a moment of how this grandmother fights back. Because people like Garrett, they count on good people staying silent. We won't be silent. Let me take you back 6 months. Back to when my garden still bloomed with purpose, and my kitchen counter held 2 small backpacks every Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday was our day. Had been since Bennett and Holden were old enough to walk. Sienna would drop them off after school, and we'd have 4 precious hours together before dinner. I'd make them sandwiches cut into triangles, because somehow triangles taste better than squares, according to 8-year-old logic, and we'd sit in my library while they practiced reading. Bennett loved adventure stories. Holden preferred books about space. They'd curl up on either side of me on that old floral couch my late husband and I bought 30 years ago, and I'd help them sound out the difficult words: magnificent, extraordinary, asteroid. I can still feel the weight of Holden's head against my shoulder. Still hear Bennett's laugh when I did the funny voices. That was 6 months ago, before Garrett Pembroke decided I was a threat. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there, like storm clouds gathering on a summer afternoon. But when you love your daughter, you want to believe the best about the man she chose. You want to believe that maybe, just maybe, you're wrong about the cold calculation you see in his eyes. Garrett arrived in Sienna's life 8 months ago, swept in like he'd been waiting for her all along. Charming, well-dressed, drove a silver Mercedes that seemed too expensive for a man who called himself an investment consultant. But what did I know about modern success? Maybe things were different now. He'd bring flowers when he visited, always said the right things, called me Mom Whitfield, with that perfect smile that never quite reached his eyes. But I noticed things, little things. The way he'd steer conversations away from his past, the way his phone would buzz constantly, messages he'd glance at and dismiss, the way he'd watch Sienna sign papers without really reading them, his hand resting on her shoulder like a gentle reminder of whose side she should be on. It was the papers that finally made me speak up. 3 months after they married, a wedding I'd paid for, by the way, because Garrett said his assets were tied up in investments, he started bringing documents to our family dinners: investment opportunities, estate planning, financial restructuring. I recognized those papers. My late husband had been a banker for 40 years. I knew what liquidation forms looked like. Sienna's inheritance. $400,000 her father had left her. Money he'd earned through decades of careful saving, meant to keep his daughter secure no matter what life threw at her. Garrett was moving it. All of it. I waited until I could get him alone. It was a Tuesday evening. Sienna had taken the boys to their soccer practice. Garrett had stayed behind, citing work emails he needed to finish. I found him in my kitchen, pouring himself a glass of my late husband's good scotch like he owned the place. "Garrett," I said, keeping my voice level, "I need to ask you about those investment papers Sienna's been signing." He looked up. For just a moment, just a fraction of a second, his mask slipped. I saw something cold and calculating flash across his face, something predatory. Then he smiled, smooth as silk. Mom Whitfield, I know this financial stuff can seem complicated, but trust me, I'm putting Sienna's money to work. She'll thank me when she sees the returns. $400,000 is a lot of trust, I said. What exactly are these investments? His jaw tightened. You wouldn't understand modern portfolio management. No offense, but your generation kept money in savings accounts. That's not how wealth grows. Her father worked his entire life for that money, and now it's her money, not yours. His voice had lost its warmth. Maybe you should focus on your own finances and let your daughter make her own decisions about her marriage. I'm not questioning her marriage. I'm questioning, that's exactly what you're doing. You're questioning whether she's capable of making adult choices, whether she needs her mother's permission to let her husband manage their finances. He set down the glass with a sharp click. Sienna and I have talked about this, about your need to control her life. She's been too kind to say anything, but I think it's time someone did. He stepped closer. Not threatening. Garrett was too smart for that. Just close enough to make his point. Maybe you should worry about your own future, Marlene, not your daughter's marriage. He left 5 minutes later, kissed Sienna on the cheek when she returned with the boys, told her I'd seemed a little off tonight, suggested maybe the stress of living alone was getting to me. 2 days later, my phone rang. Sienna's name on the screen. I answered with relief. Sweetheart, I'm so glad you… Mom. Her voice was ice. Garrett told me what you said. About the investments. About questioning his integrity. I never questioned his integrity. I just asked. You accused him of stealing from me, of manipulating me. Do you know how that made me feel? My own mother, trying to sabotage my marriage. Sienna, that's not what happened. I only wanted… I can't believe you'd do this. After everything Garrett's done for us. After how patient he's been with your constant interference. My heart was pounding. What interference? Sweetheart, I love you. I love the boys. I'm just trying to protect. We don't need your protection. What we need is space. From you. From your constant judgment and control. Sienna, please. The line went dead. That was the last time my daughter spoke to me. The last time, I realized later, that Garrett would allow her to speak to me. Garrett is the kind of person who punishes you for asking questions. He turned a mother's concern into a weapon against her, convinced a daughter that love was control, and protection was manipulation. If you've dealt with someone who turned your own family against you, someone who twisted every word until you became the villain in your own story, drop a comment below. Let's expose these manipulators together. Let them know we see exactly what they're doing, because silence is what they count on, and we're done being silent. They say the cruelest torture isn't pain, it's hope. For 3 weeks after that phone call, I kept hoping. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would leap. Every time I heard a car door close outside, I'd rush to the window. Maybe today she'd realize. Maybe today she'd call. But Garrett was smarter than that. He knew hope could keep me quiet, keep me waiting, keep me from taking action while he tightened his control over my daughter and grandchildren. Week 1, I left voicemails. Gentle ones. Sweetheart, I love you. Please call me when you're ready. I didn't mention Garrett, didn't mention the money, just love, just an open door. The voicemail box filled up, never returned. Week 2, I tried texting. Simple messages. Thinking of you. Hope the boys are well. Miss our Wednesdays. Every single one marked, read, never answered. By week 3, I couldn't stand it anymore. I drove to their house, a rental property I'd never seen before. Expensive neighborhood. The kind of place that requires a 6-figure income. The kind of place Sienna's teaching salary couldn't begin to afford. I rang the doorbell, my hands shaking. Garrett answered. He didn't look surprised. Marlene, not Mom Whitfield anymore. Just my first name, spoken like a problem he'd been expecting. I need to see my daughter. Sienna doesn't want to see you. He said it calmly, like he was commenting on the weather. She's asked you to respect her boundaries. Through the window behind him, I could see into the living room. Bennett and Holden were playing with trucks on an expensive rug. New toys scattered everywhere. My heart ached so badly I thought it might stop beating. Please, I said, just let me talk to her. 5 minutes. I think you should leave. Those are my grandchildren. Those are her children. And she's made her wishes very clear. He started closing the door. If you continue this harassment, we'll have no choice but to take legal action. The door clicked shut. Locked. I stood there for a long moment, so close to the boys I could hear their laughter through the glass. Bennett looked up once. I swear he saw me standing there. But Garrett appeared in the window, said something I couldn't hear, and led them to another room. I drove home and cried for 3 hours. But crying doesn't change anything. I learned that a long time ago. So I started researching Garrett's investment company, his credentials, his history. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 failed businesses in 5 years, debt collection agencies, a string of consulting jobs that lasted just long enough to gain access to client funds before the companies quietly let him go. No criminal charges. Garrett was too smart for that. But a pattern clear as day to anyone who knew where to look. And the rental house? $7,000 a month. I checked the public records. Sienna's inheritance was being drained, fast, luxury cars, designer clothes I'd seen in her social media photos, the account she'd blocked me from, but that I could still see through a neighbor's page. Expensive restaurants. A lifestyle built entirely on her father's life savings. In 4 months, Garrett had burned through more than $300,000. I tried to warn her, sent letters, dropped them in her mailbox since she wouldn't answer calls. Detailed, documented evidence of what Garrett was doing. Every single letter came back, returned to sender, written in handwriting that wasn't Sienna's. My birthday gifts for the twins in June came back the same way. 2 packages, carefully wrapped, with books I'd chosen specifically for each boy, returned, unopened. That's when I realized Sienna wasn't just avoiding me. She wasn't even seeing my attempts to reach her. Garrett had cut off every avenue. He was controlling what she saw, what she heard, what she believed. Classic isolation. I'd seen it before. In my work at the literacy center, in friends' marriages, in stories that ended badly. But seeing it happen to your own daughter and being powerless to stop it is a special kind of hell. Then came the Tuesday that broke me. I was at the grocery store trying to focus on ordinary things. Milk, bread, pretending life was normal. I turned the corner into the cereal aisle and froze. Bennett, my Bennett, standing with a shopping cart, Garrett beside him. His face lit up like the sun. "Grandma!" He started toward me, but Garrett's hand shot out, gripped his shoulder. Not hard enough to hurt. Garrett was too calculated for visible marks, but firm enough to stop him. "Bennett!" Garrett's voice was low, controlled. "We talked about this. Remember? Grandma is not well right now. She needs space to get better." Bennett's confusion broke my heart. "But she looks okay." I know it's hard to understand. Sometimes people who aren't well look fine on the outside. Garrett steered him away, the cart between us like a barrier. "We need to let the doctors help her." "But I know, buddy. When she's better, okay? When she's better." They disappeared around the corner. I stood there shaking, surrounded by boxes of cereal, unable to move, unable to breathe. A stock boy asked if I needed help. I said no. But I was lying. I needed help desperately. I just didn't know where to find it. When I got home that evening, there was an envelope on my doorstep. Legal size, heavy paper. Inside, a cease and desist letter, a restraining order application, Garrett's attorney's name at the bottom, next to a list of my offenses: harassment, unwanted contact, attempting to interfere with the minor children, stalking behaviors consistent with obsessive delusions. My hands shook as I read it. Every attempt to reach my daughter, every letter of concern, Every moment of love twisted into evidence of instability. He wasn't just taking my daughter. He was erasing me from my grandchildren's lives completely, and he was using the law to do it. Garrett is using the legal system as a weapon. This is what narcissists do. They isolate, they manipulate, and they destroy families piece by piece. They turn love into harassment. They call protection stalking. They make you the villain for caring. If you stand against people like him, if you refuse to let manipulators win, hit that like button. Let's show how many of us won't stay silent. Because every like, every comment, every share tells people like Garrett that we see through their lies. And that terrifies them. The attorney's office smelled like leather and old books. Appropriate, I suppose, for a place where you go to fight for your family in the language of law. Mr. Brennan, Walter, he insisted I call him, looked at the cease and desist letter with the tired eyes of a man who'd seen too much cruelty disguised as legal strategy. They're trying to intimidate you, he said. It's a common tactic. Make you afraid to reach out, afraid to fight back. Is it working? I asked. He looked up, studied my face. That depends. Are you afraid? I thought about Bennett's confused face in the grocery store, about Holden's books gathering dust on my shelf, about Sienna, isolated and controlled, losing $400,000 to a man who'd done this before. I'm terrified, I said, but I'm more terrified of doing nothing. He nodded slowly. Then let's talk about grandparents' rights in North Carolina. The law, he explained, was complicated. I had standing to sue for visitation because I'd had a substantial relationship with the boys, but the courts favored parental rights. I'd have to prove that visitation was in the children's best interest. The problem, Walter said carefully, is that they're going to paint you as unstable. They've already started building that narrative. The restraining order application, the claims about obsessive behavior, this reference to unverified claims about your past. That last part made me flinch. My past. The secret I'd kept for 43 years. What claims? I asked. They don't specify, which means they're fishing, hoping you have something to hide that they can exploit. I did have something to hide, but it wasn't shameful. It was survival. How much will this cost? I asked. Walter named a figure that made my stomach drop. Retirement savings. Maybe selling some furniture. My late husband's coin collection he'd loved so much. Filing will make things worse with Sienna, I said quietly. She'll see it as an attack. Garrett will make sure of that. Probably, Walter agreed. He wasn't the type to sugarcoat. I appreciated that. But staying silent means losing the boys forever. And Mrs. Whitfield, Marlene, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen men like Garrett Pembroke before. Whatever he's building in your daughter's life, it's going to collapse. And when it does, those children will need someone who never stopped fighting for them. I signed the papers that day. The next 3 weeks were brutal. Court filings, depositions. Garrett's attorney was exactly what you'd expect. A woman with expensive suits and sharp questions designed to make me look foolish. How many times did you call your daughter? How many texts? Don't you think that's excessive? Why would a stable person need to contact someone who'd asked for space? Every act of love twisted into evidence of obsession. They cited my history of hiding her identity, suggested possible mental health issues, brought up my age, 73, as if that alone proved incompetence. I had neighbors testify, good people who'd seen me with Bennett and Holden for years, but Garrett's team undermined everything. She's manipulated them too. Narcissists are often very charming. Me, a narcissist. For loving my grandchildren. That's when I made a decision that would either save me or destroy everything. I hired a private investigator. Spent money I couldn't afford. Asked him to dig into Garrett's background, his finances, everything. What he found confirmed what I'd suspected. Multiple failed businesses. A history of targeting women with assets. A pattern of financial fraud carefully constructed to avoid criminal charges. But Walter was right. This doesn't directly impact the visitation case. The judge won't care about Garrett's business practices unless they directly harm the children. Then what will the judge care about? I asked. Walter was quiet for a moment. The truth. The judge needs to see who you really are, not the villain Garrett's painted. The real you. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold. In front of me, an old newspaper clipping from 1982. The paper had yellowed, the edges soft from being handled once a year, always on the same date. Local woman saves child from house fire. Identity withheld for safety reasons. The photo showed a blurred figure, face intentionally obscured. But I knew that figure. I'd lived with her for 43 years. Tomorrow, I'd walk into a courtroom. Tomorrow, I'd face Judge Raymond Blackwood, a name that had made my breath catch when Walter first said it. Tomorrow, my secret might have to surface, because Garrett had made one critical mistake. He'd assumed I had something shameful to hide. But what I'd hidden wasn't shame. It was heroism I'd never asked credit for. And tomorrow, it might be the only thing that could save my grandchildren from a man who'd already destroyed 3 other families. I tucked the clipping into my purse, turned off the lights, and tried not to think about whether the 7-year-old boy I'd carried out of a burning building would remember the face of the woman who'd saved his life. Marlene is fighting a system that favors whoever lies better. Garrett is counting on the truth staying buried. He's counting on good people being too afraid to fight back. Too tired, too broke, too broken. Don't let manipulators like him win. Subscribe right now so you see exactly how this grandmother makes her stand. Because this is for every person who's ever been told they were crazy for caring, for every grandparent shut out of their grandchildren's lives, for every victim of financial abuse who was called a liar. Garrett thinks he's already won. He's wrong. There are moments in your life that split time in half. Before and after. The moment you hold your newborn child. The moment you bury your parents. The moment you realize the person you married isn't who you thought they were. For me, that moment came on a Thursday evening in September 1982, when I was 30 years old and still believed I could outrun my past. I was working late at the Durham Community Centre, a job I'd taken because it paid cash and didn't ask too many questions about my references. I'd been Marlene Hargrave for 6 months by then. Long enough that I'd almost stopped flinching when someone called my name, almost stopped checking over my shoulder every time a door opened. Almost. I was filing donation records when I smelled the smoke. Not cigarette smoke. Not someone burning dinner. This was thick. Acrid. Wrong. The kind of smoke that carries the sound of crackling wood and breaking glass. I ran outside. Across the street, the old Riverside apartment complex was burning. 2nd floor, right side. Flames licking out of broken windows like hungry tongues. People were already gathered on the lawn, screaming, crying. A woman in a bathrobe collapsed to her knees, her husband holding her. Fire trucks wailing in the distance, but not close enough. Not nearly close enough. "There's a boy!" someone shouted. 2nd floor. The Blackwoods' son. They thought he was already out. The couple on the lawn. The Blackwoods. I understood then why the woman was screaming. No one was going in. The smoke was too thick. The heat, too intense. The firefighters were still 3 minutes away. 3 minutes might as well be forever when your child is burning. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember my legs carrying me forward, past the shocked neighbors, past the father screaming, "Raymond! Raymond!" Past every instinct that said survival means running away from fire, not toward it. The front door hung open, broken. The smoke hit me like a wall. Thick, black, suffocating. I pulled my cardigan over my nose and mouth. Useless, but it was all I had. The stairs. I had to find the stairs. Sound disappeared into a roar. Heat pressed against my skin like a physical force. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe, but I kept climbing, one hand on the wall, following the shape of the building I'd walked past 100 times. 2nd floor. Right side. "Hello?" My voice was lost in the chaos. "Is anyone here?" I tried 3 doors. Locked. Empty. Each second the smoke got thicker, the heat more intense. My lungs screamed for air that wasn't there. Then I found the right door. It swung open under my touch. He was on the floor by his bed, 7 years old, unconscious from the smoke. His pajamas had little spaceships on them. I remember that detail so clearly. Spaceships, like he'd been dreaming of flying away. I grabbed him. He was heavy, heavier than I expected, but adrenaline is a powerful thing. I pulled him into my arms and ran for the stairs. The ceiling was groaning above us. I could hear wood splintering, cracking. The whole structure was giving way. Just make it to the stairs. Just make it down. Just make it out. I don't remember the actual descent. Terror has a way of eating memories. I just remember stumbling out onto the lawn, my lungs burning, my arms locked around a child I didn't know. The EMTs took him from me, started CPR. His parents surrounded them, the mother's screams turning to prayers. Please, please, please. And then a cough. Small at first, then another. His eyes opened. The crowd erupted in cheers. The mother sobbed, touching her son's face like she couldn't believe he was real. The father was shaking, crying, saying, thank you, oh God, thank you, to everyone and no one. Behind us, part of the second floor collapsed inward with a roar of flames and smoke. 30 seconds later, and we wouldn't have made it out. The reporters came quickly, always do when there's a good story. Local woman saves child from burning building. They wanted my name, my photo, an interview. Please, I begged the fire chief. Please don't use my name. Don't show my face. He looked at me with curiosity, maybe suspicion. You're a hero. People want to know. Please, I can't. He'll find me if you do. Understanding dawned in his eyes then. I was running from something. Someone. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. The newspaper ran the story with a blurred photo. Identity withheld for safety reasons. The Blackwood family wanted to thank me, to repay me, but I disappeared before they could. Changed my name legally the next week. Moved to Asheville 3 days after that. Built a life of invisibility. I kept one copy of that newspaper article. Just one. Tucked in a box with my marriage certificate and Sienna's birth announcement and all the other papers that mark a life. Every year, on September 15th, I'd take it out. Look at that blurred photo. Remember the weight of a 7-year-old boy in my arms and the sound of his mother's grateful sobs. His name was Raymond Blackwood. I'd saved his life and lost my own identity in the same night. But I'd do it again. 1,000 times, I'd do it again. Because some things matter more than your own safety, more than your own recognition. Some things, like the life of a child, are worth any sacrifice. I just never imagined that 43 years later, I'd walk into a courtroom and find myself facing that same child, now grown into a judge who held my entire future in his hands. Would he remember? After 4 decades, would he recognize the face of the woman who carried him out of hell? I didn't know. But tomorrow, I'd find out. The courtroom smelled different after recess. Like the air itself had changed composition, charged with something I couldn't quite name. Ms. Hartwell, Sienna's attorney, had just finished her opening statement. 20 minutes of carefully constructed lies, painting me as everything from a busybody to a danger. I watched my daughter's face the whole time, searching for some flicker of doubt, some recognition that this wasn't the mother she'd known for 35 years. But Garrett's hand was on her shoulder, and Sienna's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Mrs. Whitfield, Judge Blackwood's voice cut through my thoughts. Please take the stand. My legs felt like water as I stood. Walter gave me an encouraging nod, but I could see the worry in his eyes. We were losing. Everyone in that courtroom could feel it. I walked past the gallery, past Sienna, who still wouldn't look at me, past Garrett, whose smile had grown wider with each minute of Ms. Hartwell's statement. The witness stand felt like a stage, or a dock, or a confessional. The bailiff approached with the Bible, an older man, kind eyes. Please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. I did. Do you swear to tell the truth? The whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God? I do. Please state your full name for the record. This was it. The moment when my carefully constructed identity would either save me or condemn me. I looked directly at Judge Blackwood, met his eyes for the first time since he'd entered the courtroom. Marlene Catherine Whitfield, I said clearly, then took a breath. Formerly Marlene Hargrave. His pen stopped mid-stroke. The silence that followed couldn't have lasted more than 3 seconds, but it felt like hours. I watched his face. The way colour drained from it, the way his hand tightened on the edge of his desk, the way his entire body went absolutely still. His head snapped up, and for the first time since I'd walked into that courtroom, Judge Raymond Blackwood truly looked at me. I saw the moment it happened. The moment 43 years collapsed into nothing. The moment a 7-year-old boy's last conscious memory. A woman's face above him, smoke all around, arms lifting him, aligned with the face of the 73-year-old grandmother sitting in his courtroom. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly, then closed. He blinked hard, like a man trying to clear a hallucination. "Is that?" he whispered. So quietly I almost didn't hear it. "Is that her?" The courtroom was dead silent. Everyone knew something had happened, even if they didn't understand what. Behind me, I heard Sienna shift in her seat, heard Garrett whisper something sharp, but I kept my eyes on the judge. He was staring at me like I'd risen from the dead. "Your Honor?" Ms. Hartwell's voice, sharp with concern. "Is everything all right?" Judge Blackwood didn't answer immediately. His hand had moved to his throat, an unconscious gesture, to a spot I knew bore a small scar from where he'd scraped his neck on a doorframe while I carried him out. He'd told a reporter about it later. I'd read it in the follow-up article I'd found in the library months after the fire. He cleared his throat, collected himself with visible effort. "Counsel, approach the bench. Both of you." Walter looked at me, confused. Ms. Hartwell looked irritated, but they both moved forward. The whispered conference lasted 2 minutes. I couldn't hear the words, but I watched Judge Blackwood's face, watched him struggle with his professional composure, watched him glance at me again, as if checking to make sure I was real. Walter's expression shifted from confusion to shock. Ms. Hartwell's eyes narrowed. When they returned to their tables, Walter was pale. Ms. Hartwell looked like a predator who just smelled blood. "This court will take a 5-minute recess," Judge Blackwood announced. His voice was steady, but I could hear the tremor underneath. "I need to speak with Mrs. Whitfield and counsel in my chambers." Immediately, he stood, and everyone rose automatically. But before he left, he looked at me one more time. I saw tears in his eyes. 43 years. 43 years since I'd carried him out of that fire, since I'd disappeared to keep myself safe, since I'd sacrificed recognition for survival. And now, when I needed credibility more than I'd ever needed anything, the universe had given me back the one witness who could testify to who I really was. Not the villain Garrett had painted. Not the unstable woman from Ms. Hartwell's opening statement. A woman who'd run into a burning building to save a stranger's child. A hero who'd asked for nothing in return. In chambers, Judge Blackwood stood by the window, his back to us. His shoulders were shaking slightly. "Your Honor?" Walter ventured. The judge turned. His face was wet. "Ms. Whitfield? Marlene Hargrave?" His voice cracked on my old name. "Durham. 1982? The Riverside apartment fire?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said quietly. "Your Honor, you saved my life." "I did." He sat down heavily in his chair, put his head in his hands for a moment, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Gratitude, wonder, disbelief. "I've spent 43 years trying to find you, to thank you, to understand why you vanished, why you refused recognition. My parents searched for years." He shook his head. "And here you are, in my courtroom, fighting for your grandchildren." Ms. Hartwell cleared her throat. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this creates a clear conflict of interest. You'll need to recuse yourself from—" "I'm aware of the ethical implications, Counselor." Judge Blackwood's voice had regained its authority. "But let me be clear about something. What happened in 1982 doesn't change the facts of this case. I can and will judge the evidence fairly. But, Your Honor, however, he cut her off. What it does change is my understanding of who Marlene Whitfield is, not based on character witnesses who might be biased, not based on allegations and insinuations, based on personal knowledge of her character. And that, Counselor, is admissible. He looked at me. Mrs. Whitfield, I need to ask you, why did you hide? Why did you refuse to be identified? So I told him about the man I'd been running from, about the abuse, about how saving Raymond meant risking exposure, about the choice I'd made to change my name, to disappear, to build a new life in obscurity, about how I'd followed his life from afar over the years, proud when I saw his name in the paper. High school valedictorian, law school, appointment to the bench, my secret victory. When I finished, there were tears on his face again. Your Honor, Ms. Hartwell said sharply, this is highly inappropriate. The emotional connection is exactly why I'm staying on this case, Judge Blackwood said firmly. Because Mr. Pembroke's strategy relies on convincing this court that Mrs. Whitfield is unstable, delusional, a danger. But I have personal knowledge that contradicts that narrative, and I will not recuse myself and give him the victory of an uninformed judge. He stood. We're going back out there. Mrs. Whitfield will testify, and this court will hear the truth, all of it. We filed back into the courtroom. I took the stand again. Judge Blackwood settled into his chair, his composure restored. But I saw Garrett whisper something urgent to Ms. Hartwell, saw her nod, saw her smile in a way that made my stomach drop. Your Honor, she said, standing, given this revelation about Mrs. Whitfield's past and the emotional nature of it, we'd like to call our next witness, someone with professional expertise on Mrs. Whitfield's mental state and behavior patterns. The courtroom door opened. A man in an expensive suit walked in, carrying a leather portfolio. Late 50s, professionally groomed, the kind of face you'd trust with your secrets. Please state your name for the record, Ms. Hartwell said. Dr. Dalton Merrick, clinical psychologist. My blood went cold. Dr. Merrick, have you had the opportunity to observe Mrs. Whitfield over the past several months? I have. And have you reached any professional conclusions about her mental state? He opened his portfolio, pulled out a typed report. I have significant concerns about Mrs. Whitfield's psychological stability and her fixation on her grandchildren. I'd never seen this man before in my life, but Garrett had paid him to destroy me. And judging by the smile on Garrett's face, he thought he'd just played his winning card. Garrett thought he had this case won. But he didn't count on Marlene's past coming back to save her. He didn't count on the judge being someone who knew, really knew, what kind of person she was. But manipulators like Garrett always have a backup plan. They pay experts to lie. They weaponize the system. They turn everything, even heroism, into a weapon. If you want to see manipulators like Garrett get what they deserve, you need to subscribe. Because this story isn't over, and you need to see how it ends. Don't let him win. I want you to understand something about gaslighting. It's not just lies. Any fool can lie. Gaslighting is when someone takes your reality and twists it so thoroughly that you start doubting your own eyes, your own memory, your own sanity. And the really skilled ones, people like Garrett Pembroke, they don't do it alone. They hire professionals to do it for them. Dr. Dalton Merrick looked exactly like what he was supposed to be. Credible. Expensive suit, silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of gentle, authoritative voice that made you want to believe whatever he said. Dr. Merrick, Ms. Hartwell continued, please explain to the court how you came to observe Mrs. Whitfield. I was retained by Mr. Pembroke 3 months ago to conduct a discreet behavioral assessment. He was concerned about Mrs. Whitfield's increasingly erratic behavior toward his family. And what methods did you use? Observational analysis in public settings. The grocery store, church, the public library. I documented patterns of behavior consistent with obsessive attachment disorder. I felt Walter tense beside me. We hadn't known about this. Garrett had been paying someone to watch me, to follow me, to document every moment I'd spent trying to reach my grandchildren. Can you describe these patterns? Ms. Hartwell asked. Dr. Merrick flipped open his report. Mrs. Whitfield displayed repeated attempts to make contact despite clear boundaries being established. She would linger in locations where she might encounter family members. On 3 occasions, I observed her sitting in her car outside the family's residence for extended periods, up to 2 hours. That was true. I had sat outside their house, hoping to catch a glimpse of the boys, hoping Sienna might see me and remember that I wasn't the villain Garrett had painted. Now it was being used as evidence that I was a stalker. Dr. Merrick, in your professional opinion, would continued contact with Mrs. Whitfield be in the best interest of the children? Absolutely not. The obsessive patterns, combined with her documented history of concealing her identity and running from authorities. Objection! Walter was on his feet. That's a complete mischaracterization of— I'll allow it, Judge Blackwood said, but his voice was tight. But Dr. Merrick, please stick to observed behavior, not speculation about history you weren't witness to. Of course, Your Honor. Dr. Merrick smiled, unruffled. What I can say is that Mrs. Whitfield's behavior patterns suggest someone who has difficulty accepting boundaries and may pose a risk to the emotional well-being of the minor children. Walter's cross-examination was fierce. He established that Dr. Merrick had never actually spoken to me, never reviewed any medical records, never conducted any standardized psychological testing. Dr. Merrick, did Mr. Pembroke pay you $15,000 for this testimony? I was compensated for my professional services, yes? $15,000 to watch a grandmother try to see her grandchildren and call it a mental disorder? I was compensated for my expertise and time, Counselor. Not for my conclusions, but I could see it in the jury's eyes, if there had been a jury. In the gallery, even Sienna looked uncertain now, like maybe she was starting to wonder if Garrett had orchestrated all of this. Judge Blackwood leaned forward. Mrs. Whitfield, I'd like to hear from you directly. Would you like to respond to Dr. Merrick's assessment? I stood. My hands were shaking, but I'd come too far to let fear win now. Your Honor, The courtroom door burst open. A woman rushed in, mid-40s, dressed in business casual, her face flushed like she'd been running. A court clerk tried to stop her, but she pushed past. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but I have information this court needs to hear. Information about Garrett Pembroke. Judge Blackwood's eyebrows rose. And who are you? Lydia Pembroke. She looked directly at Garrett. His ex-wife. The color drained from Garrett's face. Sienna's head snapped toward him. Ex-wife? Her voice cracked. You told me you were never married. You said— Sienna, don't listen to her. Garrett grabbed for her arm. She's lying. But Sienna yanked her arm away. How does she know your full name? How does she know things about you that I— Your Honor, Lydia said firmly. I know I'm out of order, but if you'll allow me 5 minutes, I can prove that everything Mr. Pembroke has said about Mrs. Whitfield is a lie, because he did the exact same thing to me 3 years ago. She held up a folder. Bank records, court documents from our divorce, evidence of financial fraud, and testimony from 2 other women he did this to before me. The courtroom exploded into whispers. Garrett was on his feet. Your Honor, this is a circus. This woman is clearly delusional, has stalking charges against her and— Sit down, Mr. Pembroke. Judge Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Ms. Pembroke, I'm going to allow you to testify. Bailiff, swear her in. As Lydia walked to the witness stand, I watched Garrett's face. The smooth mask was cracking. The confident smirk was gone. His hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. And Sienna, my daughter, she was staring at him with an expression I'd seen before. The look of someone waking up from a nightmare only to realize the nightmare is real. The look of someone who'd just realized they'd been lied to about everything. Lydia settled into the witness stand, raised her hand, swore to tell the truth, and then she began to speak, and Garrett Pembroke's carefully constructed empire started to crumble. This is what people like Garrett do. They lie, they manipulate, they pay experts to destroy good people's reputations with fake diagnoses and twisted observations. They turn grandmothers into villains and love into obsession. But here's what they don't count on. The truth always has witnesses. Always. And sometimes those witnesses show up right when you need them most. If you've ever been lied about, if you've ever had someone twist your reality until you felt crazy, comment justice below. Let's stand together against these con artists. Let's show them that we see through their lies. Because Garrett is watching this right now, and he needs to know we're not staying silent anymore. There's a particular sound that comes when something breaks beyond repair. Not a crash, not a bang. More like a crack that starts small and spreads, the way ice fractures across a frozen lake just before someone falls through. That's what I heard in the courtroom as Lydia Pembroke began to speak. My name is Lydia Ann Pembroke. I was married to Garrett Pembroke for 6 years. We divorced 3 years ago, after I discovered he'd stolen nearly every penny I had. Her voice was steady, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from being ground down by someone who pretended to love you. How much did he take? Judge Blackwood asked. $230,000. My inheritance from my father. Gone in 4 years. I watched Garrett's face. He was trying to maintain composure, but sweat had formed on his upper lip. His lawyer, Ms. Hartwell, was flipping through papers frantically, trying to find some procedural way to stop this testimony. Ms. Pembroke, Judge Blackwood continued, why are you here today? Because I saw Mrs. Whitfield's name in the court filings, public record, and I recognized the pattern. She looked at me then, her eyes full of sad understanding. He isolated me from my family too, told them I was unstable, that they were controlling, that our love was so special, so unique, that no one else could understand it. Sienna made a small sound in the gallery, a sob, quickly stifled. He convinced me my mother was jealous of our happiness, that my sister was trying to sabotage our marriage. Within 6 months, I'd stopped answering their calls. Within a year, I'd cut them off completely. And the money? Walter asked, taking over the questioning now that Judge Blackwood had allowed the testimony. Lydia pulled documents from her folder. Bank statements, investment prospectuses, court records, shell companies. That's how he does it. Garrett creates fake investment opportunities, real-looking paperwork, professional websites, the whole thing. The money goes into accounts he controls. Then he slowly drains it. Luxury cars on lease, gambling, paying off debts from previous victims. Previous victims. Walter repeated. There were others? At least 3 that I know of. I found them after the divorce. Women with inheritances or settlement money. He targets them, marries them, isolates them, and bleeds them dry. Then he moves on. Ms. Hartwell stood. Your Honor, this is hearsay and character assassination. None of this is relevant to— It's extremely relevant, Judge Blackwood said coldly. Continue, Ms. Pembroke. The pattern is always the same. He finds a woman with money, but also with vulnerability. Maybe a recent loss, like Mrs. Whitfield's daughter losing her father. He love bombs them, makes them feel special. Then he starts the isolation. And if anyone questions him, especially a mother, he makes that person the villain. She pulled out more papers. These are bank records from Sienna Pembroke's accounts. I obtained them through a forensic accountant who helped me with my divorce. In 8 months, Garrett has moved $315,000 out of her inheritance. The remaining $85,000 is in a joint account he controls. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Where did the money go? Walter asked. Same places it always goes. This rental property, $7,000 a month, by the way, which is triple what a reasonable person would pay. Car leases, high-stakes poker games at the casino, and payoffs. Payoffs. Dr. Merrick received $15,000, but that's not all he paid. She looked at the psychologist, who'd gone very pale. Dr. Merrick also has a malpractice lawsuit pending. 3 former patients claiming he falsified diagnoses for money. Garrett found him specifically because he was desperate enough to lie for cash. Dr. Merrick stood. This is slander. I'm leaving. Sit down, Judge Blackwood ordered. You'll leave when I say you can leave. Bailiff, please ensure Dr. Merrick remains in the courtroom. I felt something shift in my chest. Hope. Real hope. For the first time in 6 months. Walter presented my private investigator's findings. Documentation of Garrett's failed businesses. Debt collection notices. A pattern of fraud so clear it was like reading the same story over and over with different names. Your Honor, Walter said, Mrs. Whitfield isn't unstable. She's not obsessed. She's a grandmother who saw her daughter being targeted by a professional con artist and tried to sound the alarm. And instead of being heard, she was silenced, demonized, and dragged into court. Judge Blackwood turned to me. Mrs. Whitfield, would you like to address the court? I stood. My voice came out stronger than I expected. Your Honor, I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here because 2 little boys, Bennett and Holden, are living with a man who views them as obstacles to money, and their mother, my daughter, has been so thoroughly manipulated that she can't see what's happening. I looked at Sienna. She was crying now, her hands over her face. I've made mistakes in my life. I've hidden from things I shouldn't have hidden from. I've been afraid, but I have never, not once, stopped loving my daughter or fighting for what's right, even when it cost me everything. I took a breath. 43 years ago, I ran into a burning building to save a child I didn't know. Today, I'm standing in this courtroom trying to save my family from a different kind of fire. That's not obsession, Your Honor. That's love. Judge Blackwood was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Garrett. Mr. Pembroke, I'm ordering a full financial audit of all accounts associated with you and Mrs. Sienna Pembroke. I'm also referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential fraud charges. Garrett exploded out of his seat. This is ridiculous. Sienna, tell them. Tell them your mother is lying about everything. All eyes turned to my daughter. She was staring at him with an expression I'd never seen before. Not love, not trust, something closer to horror. Garrett, she said quietly, were you really married before? Sienna, don't listen to. Just answer the question. Were you married to her? His jaw clenched. It was years ago, ancient history. She's bitter about the divorce, and you told me you'd never been married. You told me I was your first everything. Her voice was rising. You told me my mother was lying about you. But she wasn't lying, was she? Sienna, how much money is left? Of my inheritance. How much? Garrett didn't answer. How much, Garrett? We've made investments. How much is left? Silence. Sienna stood up. Her whole body was shaking. Mom was right, about everything, and I chose you over her. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. For the first time in 6 months. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Garrett grabbed her arm, not gently. Sit down. We're leaving. This is a circus, and remove your hands from her, Judge Blackwood said. His voice was ice. Now. Garrett let go, but his face had transformed into something ugly. The mask was gone completely. You're all insane, he spat. I gave that woman everything, and this is how she… Mr. Pembroke, Judge Blackwood interrupted. You're making this worse for yourself with every word. But Garrett couldn't stop. That's what happens when a carefully constructed lie collapses. The person underneath can't help but reveal themselves. She's weak, just like her pathetic mother. Just like all of you. I built something. I was building a life. You were building debt, Judge Blackwood said flatly. With other people's money. Court is adjourned. Mr. Pembroke, you're ordered to remain in the jurisdiction pending investigation. Mrs. Whitfield, your petition for visitation rights is granted immediately. We'll schedule a follow-up hearing for permanent arrangements. The gavel came down. And just like that, it was over. Garrett was escorted out by the bailiff, still protesting, still making threats that no longer had any power. Dr. Merrick was detained for questioning about his medical license and the $15,000. Ms. Hartwell packed her briefcase in silence, avoiding everyone's eyes. And Sienna, my daughter, collapsed into her seat, sobbing into her hands. I wanted to go to her. Every instinct in my body screamed to rush over, to hold her, to say that everything would be okay. But Walter put a gentle hand on my arm. Give her a moment. She needs to process this. So I stood there, watching my daughter's world shatter, knowing that rebuilding would take time, knowing that some bridges, once burned, take years to rebuild, but also knowing that for the first time in 6 months, I could see my grandchildren again. And sometimes that's where healing begins. The courtroom emptied slowly, people filing out with whispered conversations, shocked faces, the kind of energy that comes after watching something dramatic unfold. But Sienna didn't move. She sat in that gallery pew, shoulders shaking, mascara streaking her face, while the truth of the last 8 months washed over her in waves. I wanted to go to her, but I waited. Sometimes love means standing still, even when every part of you wants to move forward. Finally, she looked up, looked directly at me. "Mum?" she said. Just that one word. But it held 6 months of pain, of realization, of shame. I took one step toward her. Just one. And she stood, walked to me, fell into my arms like she used to when she was small and had scraped her knee or had a nightmare. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed into my shoulder. "I'm so, so sorry. He told me you were trying to control my life. He said you'd always been jealous of my happiness. He made me believe—" "Shh," I said, stroking her hair. "I know what he did. I cut you off. For 6 months, I wouldn't talk to you. I wouldn't let the boys see you. And you were right about everything." "Yes," I said quietly. I was. I wasn't going to lie to her. Wasn't going to say it was okay or that it didn't matter, because it did matter. Those 6 months mattered. The birthdays I missed. The bedtime stories I didn't read. The moments I'd never get back. But I also understood manipulation. I'd lived through it myself, decades ago. I knew how someone like Garrett could take your reality and twist it until you couldn't see straight. "How much money is left?" she asked, pulling back to look at me. I hesitated, then decided she deserved the truth. "According to Lydia's documents, about 50,000, maybe less." She closed her eyes. "Dad's entire inheritance, everything he worked for, gone. Not gone. Stolen. There's a difference. I let him steal it. I signed the papers. I trusted him. You loved someone who lied to you. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. That's being human." Walter approached us carefully. "Mrs. Whitfield, both of you, I need to discuss next steps. Sienna, you'll want to file for divorce immediately, and we need to document everything for the criminal investigation." Sienna nodded numbly. Over the next week, the full scope of Garrett's operation came to light. 4 women total, including Sienna and Lydia. Over $1 million stolen across 8 years. Shell companies in 3 states. Fake investment portfolios. A pattern so clear that the district attorney called it one of the most brazen domestic fraud cases he'd seen. Garrett was arrested on 14 counts of fraud, forgery, and theft. Dr. Merrick lost his medical license. The state board didn't take kindly to psychologists who accepted $15,000 to fabricate diagnoses. And Sienna filed for divorce. But divorce doesn't heal the damage instantly, doesn't erase the choices made or the trust broken. 2 weeks after the trial, she brought Bennett and Holden to my house. They ran to me like I'd never been gone. Children are like that sometimes. They love without complication, without holding grudges. They just love. "Grandma!" Bennett crashed into me. "Mom said we can come every weekend now." "Every weekend and Wednesdays," Holden added, hugging my waist. Like before. Like before. As if 6 months was a brief interruption and not a chasm that had nearly swallowed us all. But I held them and breathed in the smell of their hair and felt something crack open in my chest that had been sealed tight for half a year. After they settled into the library with their books, right where they belonged, Sienna and I sat in the garden. "I don't know how to apologize enough," she said. "You don't," I said simply. "You can't apologize enough for something like this. So we'll just move forward. Can you forgive me?" I was quiet for a long time, watching a butterfly land on a rose bush, thinking about all the things I'd learned about forgiveness over 73 years. I can forgive the manipulation, I said finally. I understand how Garrett controlled you. But Sienna, you chose to believe him over me. You chose not to question. You chose to shut me out without even hearing my side. She nodded, tears flowing again. That hurt. It still hurts. And I need you to understand that some things can't just be smoothed over with an apology. I know. But, I continued, I also know that you're trying to rebuild. You've filed for divorce. You're working with the lawyers to recover what money you can. You're in therapy. You're doing the work. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it's a start. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the boys' laughter floating through the open window. What happens now? She asked. Now? You rebuild your life. You get a job. And yes, you'll need one, because the money is mostly gone. You find an apartment you can actually afford. You raise your sons to recognize manipulation when they see it. And us? We'll see. Trust isn't given back freely just because someone says they're sorry. It's earned. Slowly. Over time. It wasn't the tearful reconciliation you see in movies. There was no swelling music. No moment where everything was suddenly perfect. Because real life doesn't work that way. Real life is messy and complicated, and sometimes the people you love hurt you so badly that healing takes years, not days. But it was honest, and maybe that was more important than comfort. Garrett's empire of lies crumbled because one grandmother refused to give up. She didn't fight back with anger or revenge. She fought back with truth, with persistence, with love that wouldn't quit even when it cost her everything. If you believe in fighting for family even when they push you away, even when they believe lies about you, leave a comment below. Let's show how powerful standing your ground can be, because manipulators like Garrett are watching, and they need to know. We see them. We won't be silenced. We won't give up. Subscribe if you believe truth always wins in the end, even when it takes time, even when it's painful, because it does win. Always. 1 year later, I stood at a podium in the same Durham Community Centre where I'd worked 43 years ago. It had been renovated since then. New floors, fresh paint, but the bones were the same. And across the street, where the Riverside apartment complex once stood, there was now a small park with a memorial plaque. The room was full of grandparents, some my age, some younger, all of them fighting for the right to see their grandchildren. My name is Marlene Whitfield, I said into the microphone, and I'm here to tell you that the fight is worth it, even when you think you've lost, even when the system seems designed to silence you, even when your own children believe lies about you. I looked out at their faces, saw pain I recognized, exhaustion I'd felt. I spent 6 months cut off from my grandsons. 6 months watching a con artist drain my daughter's inheritance while poisoning her against me. 6 months being called obsessive, unstable, dangerous, for the crime of loving my family. I paused, let that sink in. But I kept fighting, not because I was sure I'd win, but because giving up would have meant those boys grew up believing I'd abandoned them, and I couldn't live with that. I told them about the courtroom, about Judge Blackwood, about how the secret I'd kept for 43 years became the weapon that saved me. You can't predict how justice will come, I said. Sometimes it comes from places you never expected, but it only comes if you keep standing. After the talk, people approached me with their stories. Women who'd been shut out by manipulative sons-in-law, men who'd been accused of being bad influences by daughters-in-law who wanted to isolate their partners, grandparents who'd spent their savings on legal fees only to lose in court. I listened to each one, gave them Walter's card, told them about grandparents' rights organizations, connected them with each other, because isolation is what abusers count on. Connection is what defeats them. Later that evening, I returned home to find Sienna's car in my driveway. She'd moved into a small apartment 6 months ago. 2 bedrooms, modest, but hers, paid for with a teaching salary and no debt. The divorce had been finalized 3 months prior. Garrett was serving a 5-year prison sentence with restitution orders he'd never be able to pay. They'd recovered $42,000, a fraction of what he'd stolen. But something. Bennett and Holden burst out of the car, running to me with paintings they'd made at school. "Grandma, look, I painted a dragon. Mine's a spaceship." I admired each one with appropriate seriousness, hung them on my refrigerator next to last week's artwork and the week before that. Sienna followed more slowly. We'd been rebuilding for a year. Therapy sessions, difficult conversations, moments of progress and moments of setback. She was different now, harder in some ways, more cautious, less trusting, but also stronger, more aware. "How was the talk?" she asked. "Good. Painful. Necessary." She nodded. We'd talked about my advocacy work, about how I'd turned my pain into purpose. She supported it, even though it meant I sometimes spoke publicly about what happened. "Mum," she said quietly, while the boys played in the garden, "I know I say this too much, but I'm sorry. For all of it. I know you are. Do you think you'll ever forgive me completely?" I considered the question. Really considered it. "I think forgiveness isn't a destination," I said finally. "It's more like a path you keep walking. Some days I feel like I'm there. Some days the hurt comes back. But I keep choosing to walk forward instead of staying stuck in anger." "That's fair. And Sienna, you need to forgive yourself too. You were manipulated by a professional. That's not weakness. That's being human." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't quite there yet. Maybe she'd never be. Some scars don't fully heal. But she was trying, and that counted for something. Before she left, she hugged me. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you. That's what mothers do," I said simply. After they left, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, watching the sun set over the mountains. People ask me if I regret the fight, if it was worth the cost, the legal fees, the emotional toll, the 6 months of hell. And I tell them this: every single second was worth it. Because family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when the door is slammed in your face. It's about fighting for what's right, even when everyone calls you crazy. It's about refusing to disappear just because someone wants to erase you. Garrett Pembroke thought he could isolate a grandmother and steal a future. He thought he could manipulate the system, pay off experts, turn a daughter against her mother. He was wrong, because you can't erase someone who refuses to be erased. And you can't defeat love that won't quit. 43 years ago, I ran into a burning building to save a child I didn't know. This year, I walked into a courtroom to save a family I'd always known. Both times, I chose courage over safety. Both times, I chose love over fear. And both times, it was worth every sacrifice. That's my story. That's my truth. And if you're fighting a similar battle, if someone is trying to erase you from your grandchildren's lives, trying to silence you, trying to make you the villain, don't give up. Keep fighting. Keep showing up. Keep choosing love. Because the people who try to destroy families count on good people staying quiet. And we're not quiet anymore. Garrett Pembroke represented everything wrong with people who manipulate families. He thought he could isolate a grandmother and steal a future. He thought he could turn a daughter against her mother with lies and fake experts and legal intimidation. He was wrong. If you stand against people like Garrett, if you believe grandmothers like Marlene deserve to be heard, deserve to fight for their families without being called crazy, then do 3 things right now. First, hit that subscribe button, because stories like this need to be told. Manipulators like Garrett need to know we're watching. Second, smash that like button. Let's show how many people stand with grandmothers who refuse to give up. Third, comment "hero" below if you believe Marlene did the right thing. If you believe love is worth fighting for, even when it costs everything. Let's fill this comment section with so much support that anyone going through this knows they're not alone. Because people like Garrett are watching these videos. They're seeing how many of us refuse to stay silent. They're learning that their tactics don't work anymore, that we see through the lies, that we won't let them destroy families without a fight. One grandmother saved two little boys from losing their hero. Now let's make sure no grandmother ever has to fight alone again. Hit subscribe, hit like, comment, hero, and share this with anyone who needs to hear it, because Marlene's fight is over. But the war against family manipulation? That's just beginning, and we're going to win. This grandmother walked into court when everyone called her crazy. Her daughter rolled her eyes at her dramatics. But then a judge recognized her face and remembered that 43 years ago she'd saved his life. Sometimes the heroes we forget become the heroes we need most, and sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. This is Marlene's story, and it's a reminder that love, real, persistent, unshakable love, always wins in the end. Always. In the meantime, on the final screen, I'm leaving you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until now.